What's going on, guys? This is Martyrs Brigade 99 coming to you once again with another session of Dark Souls PvP. Alright guys, we're back at it once again for another edition to the Battle of the Build series. Now, before we get started, I'd like to offer my thanks and give a show of appreciation to good old LeftoverPie. He's going to be today's volunteer for this volume of the Battle of the Build series. Now, actually, I've had a lot of guys ask me about dual wielding, right? And they've been asking me for a good while now. See, the thing is, I'm not a jack of all trades, right? I have a hard enough time trying to deal with one weapon, let alone trying to dual wield. So after, doing a little homework and running into good old LeftoverPie, I figured that this would be an awesome showcase. Now, here's another thing. Since I have received a lot of comments and personal messages asking me specifically about dual wielding builds, I think I'll go ahead and put the information out there now. It is my intent to go ahead and upload a few videos of dual wielding builds. Now, I will not be doing it myself. I'm not good at dual wielding, right? Like I said before, I have a hard time just dealing with one weapon, let alone two at the same time. So if some of you guys have experience at dual wielding, right? Some of you guys have had a lot of practice with it. Go ahead, leave me a comment, right, or send me a personal message. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and hook up with you. We'll have a number of matches, and if the matches go pretty well, and actually when I say well, I'm not defining well as in I win the most. That's not how I define well, right? Because the purpose of the Battle of the Build series is not to see who can beat who. Now granted, I'm not saying that I'm not going to play hard, right? It's still competition. I'm just talking about the focus. The focus of the Battle of the Build series is to showcase a number of builds so as to spark player creativity with regard to creating builds, right? Because for a long time we've seen basically the same type of builds, right? Either you have your great combustion build, which a lot of people will call a pyro, for which it is not. We've seen a lot of Wrath of the Gods / Dark Moon and Sunlight Blade builds, for which a lot of people will call them faith builds, but they don't really use anything other than Wrath of the Gods or the buffs, right? And we have seen a lot of mage builds, for which, you should basically just call them Dark Bead / Pursuer builds, because that's the only thing that they use. They don't really experiment with anything else. So, like I was saying, the point I was getting at is if a lot of you guys have some experience with some dual wielding, go ahead and contact me. We'll have a few matches, and I'll make a determination based upon the series of matches that we have if it should be featured in the Battle of the Build series. Now, what I intend to do, since we already have a Battle of the Build featuring LeftoverPie as a dual wieldist, I will have a Battle of the Builds. It will stay, what is this, volume 12, I think this is the Battle of the Builds volume 12, but we will have sub videos or additional videos, right, of dual wielding, right? So basically any other dual wielding videos that I come up with, it will be kind of like Battle of the Builds volume 12A or volume 12B, right? So you guys can get some fresh ideas and hopefully to spark your interest into doing something new. So that's my intention. Alright, so enough about that. Like I said before, now for a lot of you guys on Xbox, you guys should be familiar with who good old LeftoverPie is. He's one of those guys that are definitely up there with regard to PvP. I've heard tons of people talk about him. From Elite to, so many names I can't even really give a number. As a matter of fact, that was a hot shot parry right there. As a matter of fact, he did that with a Falcon. Hotshot Barry, definitely effective with that dual wielding. So yeah, he's one of the top guys in the book of the guilty, right? So he has definitely been out here raising. Well, you know what he's been raising, and he's been raising it for a long time. All right, so I'd like to offer my thanks once again, and shout out to good old Leftover Pie. Now, let's talk about strengths and weaknesses. With regard to strengths and dual wielding, I think your options are kind of limitless, right? Because when it comes to dual wielding, you can pair off plenty of weapons. Plenty of weapons. Now, it will definitely require for you to do a little homework, take a little time to kind of experiment a little bit with some trial and error to figure out which will be the best dual wielding combinations for you. But once you do, I've definitely seen a lot of good guys with some hotshot dual wielding builds. Right, so much so that watching just some of those guys in action has motivated me to try to get out there and experiment with the dual wielding. So one of the biggest pros is the fact that you have limitless options. Limitless options. Another thing, because some of these weapons have different attack animations in the left hand than what they do in the right, you really have the potential to throw off a lot of your opponents. Case in point, the Black Knight Great Axe. We all are pretty much familiar with the moveset of the Black Knight Great Axe, both one-handed and two-handed, when it is in the right hand. However, if you guys have ever seen the Black Knight Great Axe in the left hand, it kind of has like a beatdown animation, right? I mean, that's basically the best way that I can describe it. You know, here's another combination. As a matter of fact, I've seen, I think it was Pep in a Fight Club, or maybe it was just on a random stream. He was dual wielding with a Zweihander in the left hand and a Balder side sword in the right hand. And his combination would be a left hand hit with a Zweihander, and to the extent that his opponent got stunned with his Zweihander, he would just follow up with 3 pokes with the Balder side sword. I mean, I've never seen a combination like that. So basically, just like I said before, the combinations are limitless. I mean, you have options everywhere, right? You can run the combination of, 2 rapiers, great sword, and curved sword. I mean, your options are limitless, right? And I mean, just think about it. You can go from one attack weapon in the right hand to an attack weapon that can also parry in the left, or an attack weapon in the left hand in addition to, well, actually, let me take that back, or an attack weapon in the right hand in addition to an attacking weapon that can block in the left. So you have so many options. The only thing that it will take is a lot of time, dedication, and experimentation with regard to, just trying to find out which combination suits your playstyle the best. So that's basically all the pros that I can think of. Well, actually, let me take that back. Here's another thing. Because you're not necessarily worrying about a shield, in some cases, you might not need that much endurance, right? Especially, because think about it. Right now, it looks like he's rocking the Claymore and S-Stock. Oh, no, that's Claymore and Balder side sword. Oh, no, actually, that's not even a Balder side. Is it a Balder side sword or a long sword? Well, it just really depends on, what combination you use. But think about it. If you just go Balder side sword and S-Stock, right? Both of those weapons are like 3 units in weight each. Well, if you don't have a shield, you really don't need that much dexterity. So that's even more points that you can invest into vitality or something like that. Alright, so like I said before, although it will take time for you to experiment, come up with your own preferred dual wielding combination, your options are endless. Now, let's kind of talk about some cons. The only con that I can think of with regard to dual wielding is the fact that if you do not have a shield, you might be in trouble if you are going to experiment with dual wielding. Now, I don't know how many times I've stressed in the past, for a lot of you guys that may have come from, Call of Duty, and you guys assess your own playstyle based upon, kill death ratios, which is, you can't do that with this game, and you can't even really do it with other games, right? Because different people have different preferences, right? Some people focus on missions, other people focus on other things. But like I was saying before, for a lot of you guys that may be coming from the first-person shooter world, right, you may assess yourself based upon the number of kills versus the number of deaths. You cannot do that with Dark Souls, right? And for a very obvious reason, in my personal opinion, losing to cheesy tactics is not an indicator of how bad you are if you're the victim of it. So in other words, let's just say you're a pretty good player, right? But you always lose to dark bead spammers, right? Not because the spammers are doing anything hotshot, you just get one-shotted by them. Now, because you may lose more than you win with regard to that dark bead spamming tactic, does that make you horrible? No, it doesn't. Right? It doesn't mean, somebody's using a one-shot, one-kill tactic, right? So it's not necessarily an indicator of anything. I say all that to say that, like I said before, one of the downsides is that in some cases you will not have a method to block, right? You might can parry. Now, some weapons will allow you to block, but others, you might not be able to do that. Case in point, in some of these matches, he is rocking the S-stock and the Claymore, right? With the S-stock being in the left hand. Well, in these cases, he cannot do a setup parry, guys. Now, he really has to kind of time his parry attempts and ensure that when he attempts the parry, that he is almost certain that he is going to have a successful parry, because if not, he could risk being damaged, right? Because there's no, as a matter of fact, I think when you're dual wielding, there's no such thing as a partial parry. I'm not really sure. I've never experimented with it, so I don't really want to put out any misinformation out there. But I do not think that there's partial parries with regard to attempting with a weapon in your left hand. I don't think you can partial. I just think either you get hit or you parry. Not really sure. Maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong. You have the correct information. So the fact that if you're going to be new to dual wielding, that you may lose a lot is probably a con, right? But I don't necessarily see it as a con, because anyone who's experimenting with something new, you're definitely going to lose a lot, right? Because, there might be a few, super ultra gifted people out there that, as soon as you pick up the controller, you're just dominating everybody. But normal people like me and like most players, no, you're going to lose a lot in the beginning until you kind of, learn your way through things. So the same can be said with regards to dual wielding. All right, if you guys get interested in it, do not get discouraged because you may lose a lot. Stick with it. You will eventually start to learn, different tactics, methods of engagement, things that you can change, things you should improve upon, or things that you should probably stop doing altogether. All right, so if you guys get interested, do not get discouraged if you lose a lot in the beginning. Now, and that was another good parry right there. One thing that I really like about good old LeftoverPie's tactics is, if you notice in a lot of cases when these guys are dual wielding, especially with, kind of like a falcon in the left hand, or, a parrying dagger or an S-stock or something like that, one of those weapons that parries in the left hand. A lot of those guys will just kind of run up to you and just do that repeated parry spam. Kind of like, the same tactic that a lot of these dudes do with the shield. They just kind of run up to you and parry over and over and over again. And, in my personal opinion, that really looks sloppy, whether you're doing it with a shield or whether you're doing it with an offhand weapon. It really looks sloppy just to be running up to somebody and parry. Now, I've said tons of times, I'm not saying it's not effective, because I've been parried plenty of times by someone just running up to me. But with regard to dual wielding, right? Like I said before, this is another reason why I thought this was an awesome display by good old Leftover Pie. If you notice, he is not just running up to me and hitting the parry, right, to the extent that he's using a left-hand weapon that has a parry animation. He's not doing that, right? He is only parrying when he's pretty confident that he's going to land it, for which in 2 cases, maybe even more, he's been correct, right? He's definitely been correct. So it's not one of those things where he's just kind of sloppily, running up to me and hitting the parry. Now, in this particular case, this guy kind of gave me a beat down on this build because I ran out of stamina so many times. I was getting pushed back and everything. I just couldn't do anything. GG. Alright, so, let me see. Is there anything else that I can think of as far as cons? I think that's about it, right? And I won't necessarily call it a con because, like I said before, anytime you're kind of new to something and you kind of want to experiment with it, you should already expect to lose a lot. Outside of your initial losses, I guess the only thing that I can think of is, in some cases, you will not have the protection of the shield, right? So it would probably require for you to have fast mobility, right? I really would not suggest a fat boy rolling or a medium rolling build trying to dual wield. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible, right? Most things are possible. But just looking at the limitations that dual wielding have, I wouldn't really suggest a fat boy or a medium roller to dual wield. Because think about it. The fact that you do not have a shield and that you cannot do setup parries kind of puts you in a bad position, right? So you will need to evade a lot in many cases. And with you needing the ability to, kind of get in there, stick and move, attack and retreat, I really don't think medium rolling or fat boy rolling would be the best option, right? So I think that's probably all the cons that I can think of. So like I said before, pros, your options are limitless, right? Cons, without the protection of a shield, it will really require for you to be really strategic with regard to your attacks, when you attack, how often you attack, when you engage, when you disengage. But that's with all things with regard to PvP. Right, so that's basically all the pros and cons that I can think of with regard to his particular build. Now, unfortunately, I don't really think that good old Leftover Pie has recording hardware, nor do I think he does commentaries. I'm not really sure. But, I kind of wish that a lot of these guys, right, and actually I'm not saying this to say that from now on I'm only going to do guys who record, but I kind of wish, right, I could get some of these guys who record to do a lot of these with me, mainly because basically I'm only giving my assessment based upon what I see, right? But in a lot of cases, because it's not my build, I can't really give the strength and weaknesses from the user's perspective, right? Not from the users, because in other words, I may notice a strength or weakness that the user has not even acknowledged to be a strength or a weakness. Or there may be a strength or weakness that the user may have identified that I never even thought of, right? So I kind of wish that was so, because I would love to hear good old Leftover Pie's perspective on, you know, what he has perceived to be strengths and weaknesses with regard to his build. Right, but it's all good, right? Because I'll just try to offer as much information as I can based upon, you know, kind of what I've gotten from the matches. Alright, so, hey, like I said before, guys, any of you other guys, any of you hot shots out there have some dual wielding experience, please go ahead and give me a message. We'll have, you know, probably about 5 matches ahead of time. And then from that point onward, I said, you know what? Hey, let's just go ahead and finish out the series. Right? And the reason why I say that is because I kind of want to get some guys who have experience with dual wielding, right? I don't want to get a guy on here who, you know, just for the sake of being on a video is going to say, I am a dual wielder. No, right? Because this is for the community. We're trying to promote thought, promote idea, right? Get some, you know, spark some imagination out there. And I think when we get some guys out here who's pretty good at the dual wielding, you know, it can kind of force people to kind of look at things twice and say, you know what, I think that's something I might go ahead and experiment with. Right, so that's why, like I said before, I think this was an awesome performance by good old Leftover Pie. You guys get to see some of the limitations, some of the strengths, and some of the weaknesses of his build. Now, let's go ahead and get into my build. Nothing special. To the extent that you guys are familiar with the channel, you guys will know that I just got on Xbox, right? So basically, I only have 2 builds at this point. So, I mean, if you guys notice Xbox footage on these uploads, at least up to this point, if you see my onion head, it's going to be a strength build, right? Because my strength build, I'm just rocking the Onion Bro armor selection. Now, if you notice me with my Martyrs von Steuben, costume hookup, that's basically my dexterity / quality build, right? Regardless of, I mean, you know, some of you guys call it quality. I call it dexterity. Like I said last week, because you need 28 strength to be able to wield the Morikumo, for which it is a dexterity weapon, right? So that's about it. I mean, there's really no strengths or weaknesses, I mean, with regard to my strength or dex build, right? Because in the beginning I kind of used my dexterity build. Right now I'm kind of rocking with the strength. But like I've said before, the only weaknesses that I can think of is for a lot of those guys who absolutely need a buff or who need a casting, right? Because most of the builds that I use, may it be on Xbox or PlayStation, do not use castings, right? Now, this is not to say that I don't know how to use caster builds. I definitely have a number of videos in my library wherein I'm using my Faith Mage or my Pyro Cleric. But what do I prefer? I prefer no castings, you know, sword, shield, bow maybe, and I'm good to go, right? I don't need the fancy dancy pyro. I don't need the fancy dancy, you know, buffs. Now, I may use them, you know, just to kind of switch things up every now and then, but it's not my bread and butter. And here's the reason why. I think in a lot of cases, when you have sorceries or miracles, right, it kind of motivates you to rely heavily on those things, right? So in other words, you're not necessarily working that much in all cases on your melee attacks, right? Because think about it. If you know you have and actually, let me just speak from experience. I remember one time, as a matter of fact, it was in the very beginning. I had a faith build. You know, I was one of those guys to just buff my weapon and went in for the kill. And one thing that I noticed about my own gameplay is that I played extremely sloppily. Extremely sloppily. Mainly because I was too dependent upon that buff, right? I knew that I had a minute, and I was so desperate in trying to kill my opponent with the buff that I basically left myself open to a lot of attacks because I was too busy rushing in, charging too hard, because I'm thinking like, okay, I have 1 minute to inflict max damage. So I need to hurry up, get in here, and do what I need to do. And it really caused me to make a lot of mistakes. Right? In some cases, I remember a long time ago when I used to play pyromancers. Right? I would find myself doing a lot of great combustions. You know. So I said to myself, you know what? I really don't want to rely too heavily on a lot of these things. Right? I think I want to get good first at my melee strategies, both offensive and defensive. Well, yeah, did I say that? Yeah, offensive and defensive. And once I get good at those, then I will start to experiment a little bit with caster builds. Right? Because I am of the opinion, just me personally, that these castings should supplement your gameplay. That's just my opinion. I know some of you guys are going to say, well, if I have a pure caster, I should be able to do... Okay, I'm not saying what you should or should not do. I am talking about my own opinion. I think these castings should supplement your attacks, not be your primary method of engagements. And I know when I was using a lot of those type of builds, I would rely too heavily on those things and not enough on the melee. Right, so that's just me. Okay, enough of that rant. But, hey, this is actually the last match, guys. I actually got to talking so much that I'm almost running out of time. So let me just go ahead and offer once again my thanks and show of appreciation to good old LeftoverPie. Hopefully we'll be able to do this again. Like I said before, any of you other guys that have experience with dual wielding, please leave a comment in the comment section. Right, I will be looking forward to having a series of matches. I want to go ahead and spark more player interest with regard to dual wielding. Alright guys, so until next time, Marty's Brigade is